If you do choose to freestyle your chapter titles, just make sure they aren't too wildly disparate. For example, a fic with one chapter named "Every Night I Yearn for You So Deeply That I Break," and another titled "And Then They Smut." Hello fellow fic writers, kudos for clicking on this video. My name is Cora and I'm here to help you write and post your dream fanfiction. Titling your fanfiction. Some people find it easy and some people find it hard. For the latter camp, suggesting that they also title their chapters is going to be met with some protesting. What do you mean I need to title more of my fic? Isn't doing it once suffering enough? Well, the thing about chapter titles in fanfiction is that they're more valuable than you think. I'm about to make the case for titling your chapters and give you a ton of ways to find compelling things to name them. Chapter 1. Why title your chapters? Two major reasons. Page 1. They provide intrigue. We all know that a good title, summary, and tags are pretty important for drawing in readers, but for long fics and epic lengths especially, they only tell us so much. That's why one of the first things I do when I click on a fic is look at the chapter titles. They can be the final deciding factor on if I'll give a fic a go. And also, readers who follow your fic could be following several others at the same time. If they're getting a flood of updates, chapter titles could be what determines what they'll read first, if at all. That's why you should think of each chapter title as a way to hook the reader back in. Page 2. Chapter titles are helpful. If a reader forgets where they were up to in your fic or wants to revisit their favorite part, as I often do, chapter titles make that so much easier. It also makes it a breeze to navigate your own fic. Sometimes you need to quickly reference something and chapter titles can tell you exactly where to find it. Save yourself the frantic scrolling and skimming. Name your chapters. Chapter 2. The elements of good chapter titles. Now that we have established the major advantages of titling your chapters, it's time to ask, what goes into a strong chapter title? Page 1. Description. A chapter title can, at a glance, instantly remind the reader what the chapter is about. Usually this is true for after the chapter has been read, because trying to make it descriptive for new readers will probably cause you to lose points on this next criteria. Page 2. Provide intrigue. A good chapter title sparks curiosity, either through some foreboding words, juxtaposition, or a funny out-of-context teaser. The Percy Jackson series does that last one a lot. Page 3. Set expectations. Chapter titles can be a great way to shift reader expectations, especially when there's a tone shift. Let's say the previous chapter was called something like Fun in the Sun. Look, I know it's cliche, but and it was a chance for the readers to let loose at the beach, but the next chapter involves a monster dragging one of them to the sea floor. You could title it Murky Depths, which would clue the reader in that this fun beach holiday wouldn't be fun for much longer. Page 4. Wordplay. For me, the best chapter titles are the ones that are clever puns, have double meanings, alliteration, or a cadence to them, like iambic pentameter. The Owl House is really good at this. Not only are some of the episode titles great wordplay and references like Hootie's Moving Hassle and Elsewhere and Elsewhen, but the first letters or words of each season form a message. Page 5. Consistency. This is something I'd say matters less than the other points, but it's still worth considering. Chapter titles could follow a theme, like how Season 5 of Miraculous Ladybug has one-word episode names that all end in the suffix ION, which means they all rhyme. The drawback of this is that they can be too limiting and force you to use chapter names that aren't the best suited or are maybe too similar, so it's easy to get them confused. If you do choose to freestyle your chapter titles, just make sure they aren't too wildly disparate. For example, a fic with one chapter named "Every Night I Yearn for You So Deeply That I Break," and another titled "And Then They Smut." Okay, so those are the general guidelines of good chapter titles down. Now let's get into some specific prompts. Chapter 3. Different ways to name your chapters. If you're still feeling lost, that's about to change. This is a list of all the easy ways to name your chapters. I'll be using examples from my own fics for this. Page 1. Quotes from canon. This can be a great way to foreshadow a familiar element that readers might get excited about. For example, when I had a chapter involving Link fighting Dark Link, I called it "Conquer Yourself," thus quoting Navi during the original fight from Ocarina of Time. Navi? Navi? Page 2. References to other media. These can add extra context and meaning to a chapter. For example, when I had two characters watching the sunset together, one shared his experiences growing up in his fictional indigenous culture. I decided to name this chapter "Sunset Dreaming" after a song by the Yolngu and Balanda band Yuthu Yindi, which was later covered by the Butchala rapper Birds. When naming chapters after references to other media though, the titles also need to stand on their own for anyone unfamiliar with what you're referencing. Just be sure to give credit when you do reference things, particularly if they're rather niche creations by marginalized artists. Page 3. Common idioms. An idiom is a group of words that have their own established definition. Essentially, they're a group of words that, when used together, mean more than the sum of their parts. These can be great if you love titles with double meanings. For example, I have a chapter named "Hot and Bothered." We all know what the word hot and the word bothered means on their own, and we know that together they mean aroused. And what did the chapter involve? Sweltering desert heat, some angsty conversations, but also one character thirsting over the other. Double meaning. Page 4. Twists on common idioms. With this, you get all the benefits of idioms with the added perk of novelty. Let's look at a chapter where my main characters need to learn how to sail a ship on a desert that moves and shifts like a sea. I could name it "Sail on the High Seas," but I could do better. How about "Sail on the High Sands"? Now that's intriguing. Page 5. Places. This is one of the easiest things you can name a chapter after. Do the characters travel to a new place? Name it after the place. Well, not necessarily the actual name of the place most of the time. You'll want to emphasize what makes that place novel or interesting. Is there a lake that's being drained through some unknown magical force? I'd call that the Disappearing Lake. And I did. It's much more intriguing than just the lake or Lake Hylia. Page 6. Objects or features. Another easy one. If there's an important object or detail in the chapter, name it after that. And try to make it sound intriguing too. For example, a curtain of hair or the twin messages. Page 7. Events. For example, the climb and the clobber or the student council debate. Another easy one, and this can be really great for those events you've been foreshadowing or building up to, because by then the reader is so ready to see everything go down. Page 8. Actions or goals, such as Link kidnaps the president or Off with the Gloves. These hit the reader with a sense of urgency or a promise that something exciting will happen. Page 9. Warnings. Basically, chapter titles that sound foreboding, such as "Do Your Worst" or "Those Who Lurk." These work best with foreshadowing in previous chapters and can set the mood of the chapter right away. Just be sure you don't name a happy, bubbly, fluffy chapter something foreboding, or else your readers will feel disappointed. Page 10. Themes or messages. These are great for one-word titles such as Negligence and Crushed. They're also great to slip between longer or multi-word chapter titles if you want to make a greater impact. Chapter 11, a dialogue or prose snippet. These could be from the chapter itself or calling back to an important, seemingly innocuous line from a previous chapter. The great thing about this method for naming chapters is that it never really fails when you're well and truly stuck. Just make sure that the line you choose is relevant to a major aspect of the chapter. For example, Never Too Late and My Life to Risk. Page 12, and finally, characters. This is great for when a chapter focuses on a relationship, such as Ganon and Zelda. The protagonist meets someone important for the first time, such as the Prince of Hyrule, or perhaps a confrontation with a villain, such as the King Lost to Greed. As you can see, you can name chapters after a character's name or a title bestowed upon them. First names and nicknames prime readers for a moment of intimacy or vulnerability between characters, while names with titles have a greater sense of formality, and then titles with no name attached creates distance. It can be much more foreboding. Play around with this and see which one works best. In short, chapter titles are an unsung hero of creating intrigue, setting expectations, and making it much easier to navigate your story, whether you are a reader or the writer. There's a dozen different ways to name your chapters, some of which are really simple and easy, so why not give it a go? Do you name your chapters? Are there any ways to name chapters that I've missed? Let me know in the comments below. And that's the end of the video. Kudos for watching, kudos for liking, and extra kudos if you've subscribed and hit the bell for more dreamy fanfiction tips. I will see you in my next video, but in the meantime, happy fic writing! Hello, fellow fic writers! I have big news. On Saturday, the 16th of September, I will be hosting a panel at Oz Comic Con Brisbane, presenting Fanfiction 101, how to write and post your first story. We'll be covering my top tips for quality fanfiction, the best places to post online, and how to write a banger summary that will hook readers in. Even if you've watched all my videos, some of this content will still be brand new, and there will even be a Q&A segment at the end. So if you're attending this con, please come along. I cannot wait to see you there.